being a news media man, you know pretty well how society behaves. And I remember I have a picture of Khrushchev hammering with a shoe in the United Nations. This is the extreme problem, but we are human beings, and you, most probably sometimes when you are in the bus or in the subway, somebody push you and say, well, protest. Governors send delegates not only to sign what we are producing, but also to see how they fix things in a way that they have the best possible solution for their problems. And this is the case of the Kyoto Protocol, which is famous, it's linked to climate change, it's a political issue, but you know pretty well that it's one country polluting 26%, the other countries do more or less the same. In Latin America, we have only 5% of the total carbon dioxide contamination, but 50% is because deforestation. We are not emitting, but we are eliminating sequestration of CO2. And these problems are creating difficulties because people wishes to produce now biofuel instead of food. And you will see how things will go in the near future. And this brings people fighting and discussing. It's a normal thing.
Adrienne Arsenault from Canadian Broadcasting. I'm just curious, given all of your discussion about delays and all-night sessions, can you give us a sense of what part of the report in particular proved to provoke the most discussion and most debate, and which countries proved to be the most argumentative?
Forget about an answer to the latter. But you know enough, streetwise to make your own judgments of that, I'm sure, as experienced correspondents on the issue of, climate change, etc. Governments have positions. And sometimes that affects their judgment, but pretty much, pretty much that stuff gets washed out in most cases, not all. What was the first part of the question? I forget now. Oh, the main issues. We spent a long time talking about. We had two tables, and we boiled them down to one. We lost a lot, as a gentleman from Associated Press knows, and that took a separate working group. Many hours. I mean, probably 10 hours altogether. And then plenary a couple of hours, but it tightened it up, and governments bought into it. It's regrettable that we lost stuff. We partly lost material because there wasn't enough time to work it through as well.
I would just to mention that it's quite well known, the dichotomy between policy and science. And this is not just a mere phrase. It exists because from each government, they have their own needs. And if you look the problem of the pollution produced by big countries, but you take the Advocate Davis position, you put yourself on the other side, you see a completely different situation. So we have to live in a world where we know, in any case, in any meeting that you have these confronting situations. And so is the world.
Can I add something to that? Because I don't think it would be a right story to say the message was watered down in this group at all. I don't think that's true. Certain messages were lost. We didn't cover certain aspects for time or for lack of agreement. But I don't think in any respect that the message was lost. Not in terms of the broad thrust. So I know there were stories about that at Working Group 1. I don't think they were broadly true either. But inevitably, when you have big meetings of lots of people and lots of review processes, there is a boiling down to some common ground.
We'll take this gentleman right here. I guess just use the desk mic, it seems.
Bryce, thank you. Marlo Hood from Agence France Presse. I'd like to ask a question about the human impact. It seems to me that's one of the elements that became significantly less specific as the drafts evolved. I think specifically of references to the number of people who will be subject to increased water scarcity and to hunger. Is that, are we to infer from that that was the judgment that those things are less certain than was thought initially? And a related question, there's very little, if any, reference I could find in even the main report to environmental refugees. And I know that, for example, Ivo de Boer is holding a press conference later today to talk specifically about that issue. How is it that that was not more prominent?
How did you read the full report if it hasn't been up? Doesn't matter. Right.
Professional secret.
Yeah, right. Just sort of, you protect them. The numbers on millions at risk are in the report. They are for coastal flooding, millions at risk, up to billions, actually, for Asia, particularly in the mega deltas of Asia, and there are millions at risk of increased water scarcity. That Nigel Arnell, I don't know if he's here now, who has actually done that work with Mimura from Japan, maybe he is still here. Some of those numbers are not in the report, but the complication with dealing, I work with Rosenzweig, who's here, Cynthia, whom you spoke to, a gentleman from Agence Presse. AP has got his news and he's gone, but on risk of hunger. But all those numbers need to consider the number of people in the future. Okay? So as you go into the future, in Southeast Asia, instead of having several hundred million people living in megadeltas and perhaps being on the poor side of, of average, you've got twice the number of people exposed. There's been about development pathway. So the numbers of people in Southeast Asia are going up. If it's an unequal world, like a business as usual world, a WTO world with lots of wealth, but it being very inequitable, you've got many more millions exposed. So the result, when you put these things together, the number of people at risk of water scarcity or at risk of flooding or at risk of, is two things together. And when you've got two or three things together like that, it's quite difficult for the average policymaker to make sense of it. They want to read stuff on one page, so separating out that. So I think that's the main reason why some of these numbers are not included, but they are there for both those two areas. And the table, did it have billions at the top? I can't remember. One version, no, it lost its billions. Okay, well, there you are. I didn't work in the contact group on that.
Well, regarding this issue, normally we have to think that in regions there are different, the geography we learn in school show us desertic areas, highlands, valleys. The situation is changing because the machine, the engine of the atmosphere is changing, and we have, for Latin America, the potential fact that the water, precipitation will increase in the eastern part of South America, coming from Paraguay to the south. Will be less water in Mexico and Costa Rica, northeast Brazil, and central western Argentina and central Peru, central Chile, sorry. But the problem is not only that it will rain less or more. I remember arriving in Lima in the 1960s with 700,000 people. Now they are 8 million people having the same water resource. And so the problem is how you manage this. And I mentioned before that human settlements are becoming the common thing, are consuming 3/4 of all the resources, water included, of the world, while the rural areas are half of the population consuming only 1/4. And this inequity will continue. And as Martin mentioned, he had produced some work some years ago about the Millennium Goal Objectives, the MDGs, Development Objectives. And the problem is that we are expecting to have for 2015, half of the people without water. Presently, we are 1,500,000 billion people. It will be more. This is the fact. If you continue building up a world with more people, I am not thinking in the first report of the Rome Club in 1972 that the world was ending that time, but Malthus to some extent has some ideas about that.